Hi there. It's Mrs. Writes-A-Lot here. My good friend Twyla Belk, the Gotta Tell Somebody gal, has been talking a lot about writing and writers' conferences lately. And she asked me if I could share some of my experiences from when I first started writing. I got so excited about that I jumped out of my recliner, got out of my jammies, and then I got all gussied up so I could share with you today. Well, I had just had foot surgery in February of 1998. That meant 6 weeks of sitting in my recliner while other people waited on me hand and foot and took care of my 12-month-old baby. Pure luxury. I had big plans to use that time to clean out my purse. I knew it would take 6 weeks to do that. Well, instead, God showed me that He had another plan, and that He'd been preparing me for something. He got my attention as I sat in that recliner and made it clear to me in a number of ways that He wanted me to start writing. And even though I had done some writing in other ways, not published ways, things like newsletters, Christmas programs for church, radio ads, and jingles for our Christian bookstore, I said, "But God, how can I write? I have enough problems just even trying to talk." We went back and forth during that time. Well, He also showed me how He'd been preparing me, and He brought several things together at once to convince me that I wasn't dreaming this up. I discovered a book buried in a basket that had been set aside years earlier when we owned our Christian bookstore, and it was about how to write your story. I'd forgotten about that. In fact, I really don't even remember ordering it, but God brought it to my attention while I was recovering from that surgery. Over the years, at different times when something funny or interesting or crazy or memorable happened, I'd think of something witty or brilliant. I'd jot it down on an index card and stick it in a file box because someday I might need it, and I didn't want to forget it. Oh, heaven knows that I can't remember anything these days. Well, my file box had lots of cards in it, and God reminded me of that. Also, a woman who didn't know me very well came to visit me while I was recovering, and we chatted in the living room. She said, "I keep getting the sense that you're supposed to write." Well, God got my attention through her. And then someone else told me about an interview she had heard on our local Moody radio station. It was about a writers' conference in Wheaton, Illinois at Wheaton College, and it would take place in June of that year. It was called Write to Publish, and I'd never heard of a writers' conference before. Why did my friend just happen to tell me about it at that time? All these things aligned. So I gave in and I said, "Okay, God, I get the message. You want me to write. So here's the deal. I'll hold the pen and you have to do the rest." Well, while God's plan for me was coming together in my mind, I went back to the foot doctor for follow-up. And he unwrapped that hot pink gauze from my foot that I had been staring at day in and day out, and I got to see my foot in all of its glory. There were lots of colors there, purples and blues and yellows. I had had a bunionectomy, so on the left side of my foot there was a pin on the left side with it was a long pin with a hooked end. And across my foot on the right side, I had had a cystectomy. They had removed a cyst, and so there were stitches that were stitched up with some kind of a line, like a fishing line. And then I realized that my foot hadn't been washed in a long time. It was really smelly. And a funny thing happened. It hit me that I had a hook, line, and stinker. I had a fishing foot. And that was one of the first stories I wrote. God told me to write, so I did. And you might find out today that a lot of times the experts will say to write what you know. Well, I knew my foot. I wrote story after story while sitting in that chair, and I never did get that purse cleaned out. Well, I registered for Write to Publish, and that was scary for me. I didn't know what to expect. I was way out of my comfort zone to do something like that, and I felt so overwhelmed. And maybe some of you out there have that same feeling today. But I signed up because it was a God thing, an obedience thing. So I prayed lots and lots during that time of writing and preparing for Write to Publish. I prayed for favor and for someone to take me under his or her wing. And I also prayed, God, if you really want me to be a writer, give me what other writers have. Well, I drove to Write to Publish, and on my way there, a funny thing happened. I looked in the rear view mirror, and there, protruding from my chin, was a long chin hair. It was like long enough to jump rope with. But I knew at that moment God had answered my prayer, because I had just read 3 books by 3 different authors, and each author had referred to their chin hairs. You see, God gave me what other writers had. He gave me chin hairs, and I learned a big lesson through that experience. 1 is that God has a sense of humor, and 2 is be careful what you pray for. Well, I got to Write to Publish, and the first people I met there were from my area. They had been there many times, and they took me under their wings. It was another answered prayer. Well, then I went to a continuing class, and my instructor and keynoter, Sandy, was really good, and I prayed for an opportunity to meet with her one-on-one. And as I prayed, I just kept praying, hoping that I could have the opportunity. We were staying in dorms during that conference, and at about 4 o'clock in the morning, one night I heard this, and it was a fire alarm. I threw on my robe. Yes, I was glad I had one. Ran down several flights of stairs and across the street, and I stood there with the others while the alarm blared and the fire trucks came. And who should be standing right next to me, blurry-eyed and in her jammies, but Sandy, my continuing class teacher. And I said to her, I've been praying for an opportunity to meet with you, and look, here we are. Doesn't the Bible say to make the most of every opportunity? She wasn't amused for some reason. And in her keynote later that week, she said, Mrs. Writes-A-Lot, next time you pray for something, be more specific with your prayers. Well, during Write to Publish, we had the opportunity for an after-hours critique group. And I had never done anything like that before. But I had some stories I wanted to talk about. And the man leading the group was a small, quirky fellow with curly hair and lots of energy. And I was armed with my story, Toenail Love. See, I got that foot thing going on again. Well, he saw something in me, and we had a connection. He wanted me to stay in touch with him. And in fact, he got me started with email. Back then, we did something with a Juno disc. And so he sent me a Juno disc and sent it to me and got me started so I could stay in contact with him. And, God answered many prayers during that first Writers' Conference. I could go on and on about the history I now have with that curly-haired, high-energy, quirky man. God gave me many divine appointments. That curly-haired man was one of them. I ended up working for him. I have opportunities in the industry because of him. He's a best-selling author who's written more than 140 books, and because of my connection with him and association with him, it taught me the industry from the inside out. It was a divine appointment that God had for me at that conference, and it's still playing out in my life today. So there are several lessons I learned through this experience, and I've learned many more along the way. 1, God has a sense of humor. 2, be careful what you pray for. 3, be more specific with your prayers. And 4, pray for divine appointments. Another thing is just if you're going to a writer's conference, always pray for divine appointments, but go expectantly, knowing that God has something special for you there. It might be something different than what you thought, but you're there for a reason. So pray with expectation, knowing that God has you there for a reason. Well, I could go on and on, but this is just a start. But I'll just leave by saying, keep moving forward and don't die with the story inside of you. Keep making the most of every opportunity you have. Ta-ta for now.